Welcome to my channel. Emily stood at the kitchen window, her fingers tracing the edge of the curtain as she watched the rain patter against the glass. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. Her husband Mark had left for work hours ago. His goodbye a perfunctory peck on the cheek and a mumbled promise to be home by 7. She didn't hold her breath. These days, his promises were as reliable as the weather forecast, often broken, rarely dependable. She sighed, turning away from the window. The calendar on the wall caught her eye, the red circle around today's date mocking her. Their anniversary. 15 years of marriage, and yet it felt like just another day. She had planned a special dinner, roast chicken his favorite, but now with the rain and his text about another late meeting, she wondered why she bothered. The sound of laughter outside drew her attention. She peered through the window again and saw her neighbor, Robert, kneeling in his garden, his hands deep in the soil. Despite the rain, he seemed unfazed, his wide-brimmed hat shielding his face as he worked. Emily couldn't help but smile. There was something about Robert's energy that was infectious. At 65, he moved with the vigor of a man half his age, his laughter carrying across the yard like a melody. She grabbed her umbrella and stepped outside, the cool air brushing against her skin. "Robert, you're going to catch a cold out here," she called, her voice tinged with amusement. He looked up, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he grinned. "Emily, come join me. A little rain never hurt anyone." She hesitated, then stepped off the porch and into his yard, the umbrella shielding her from the drizzle. "What are you planting?" she asked, crouching beside him. "Tomatoes," he replied, holding up a small plant. "There's nothing quite like the taste of a homegrown tomato. You should try it sometime." Emily laughed softly. "I'm not much of a gardener. I can barely keep a houseplant alive." "Nonsense," Robert said, his tone warm. "It's all about patience and care. You'd be surprised what can grow if you give it the right attention." There was something in his words that struck a chord in her. She looked at him, really looked at him, and noticed the kindness in his eyes, the way he listened as if every word she said mattered. It was a stark contrast to the dismissive nods and distracted hums she had grown accustomed to from Mark. They talked for what felt like hours, the rain easing into a gentle mist. Robert told her about his late wife, Margaret, and how they had traveled the world together. "She was my everything," he said, his voice softening. "Losing her was like losing a part of myself. But life goes on, doesn't it? You have to find joy where you can." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know how you do it," she admitted. "I feel like I'm just going through the motions most days." Robert placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're stronger than you think, Emily. Sometimes it just takes a little spark to remind us of that." The sound of a car pulling into her driveway broke the moment. Emily turned to see Mark stepping out, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He glanced at her and Robert, his expression unreadable. "I should go," Emily said, standing abruptly. "Dinner's probably ruined by now." Robert nodded, his smile gentle. "Take care of yourself, Emily. And remember, my door is always open." She hurried back to the house, her heart pounding. Mark was already inside, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "Who's the old guy?" he asked, his tone casual but edged with something she couldn't quite place. "Just my neighbor," Emily replied, avoiding his gaze. "He's nice." Mark grunted, taking a sip of his drink. "Dinner ready." "It's in the oven," she said, her voice tight. She turned to the stove, her hands trembling as she stirred the now cold vegetables. As she set the table, her mind wandered back to Robert's words. "You're stronger than you think." For the first time in years she felt a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or longing. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew one thing. Tonight, as she sat across from Mark in silence, she felt more alone than ever. And yet, as she glanced out the window at Robert's house, a small part of her wondered if that spark he spoke of was still within reach. The days blurred together, each one a carbon copy of the last. Emily woke early, made breakfast for the kids, and waved them off to school before retreating to the monotony of her routine. Mark was a ghost in their home, present but absent, his mind always elsewhere, his attention fleeting. Emily tried to fill the silence with chores, but the emptiness gnawed at her, a constant ache she couldn't soothe. It was on one such morning, as she stood at the sink scrubbing dishes, that she noticed Robert in his garden again. The sun was shining, and he was humming a tune she didn't recognize, his hands deftly pruning the rose bushes that lined his fence. She watched him for a moment, struck by the ease with which he moved, the contentment that seemed to radiate from him. Before she could second-guess herself, she dried her hands and stepped outside. "Good morning," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. Robert looked up, his face breaking into a smile. "Emily, come over, I've got something to show you." She crossed the lawn, the grass cool beneath her feet. "What is it?" He held up a small, delicate flower, its petals a vibrant shade of purple. "It's a passion flower," he said, his voice tinged with pride. "They're finicky things, but when they bloom, it's like magic." Emily reached out to touch the petals, her fingers brushing against his. She felt a jolt of electricity, a spark that made her pull her hand back quickly. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable. "You should come by more often," he said. "The garden could use your touch." She laughed, though it sounded forced even to her own ears. "I told you I'm not much of a gardener." "Maybe not yet," he said, his tone teasing. "But I think you'd be a natural." They spent the morning together, Robert showing her how to plant seeds and care for the soil. Emily found herself laughing more than she had in months, the weight on her chest lifting with every shared joke and story. For the first time in years she felt alive. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, guilt began to creep in. She glanced at her watch, realizing how much time had passed. "I should go," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "The kids will be home soon." Robert nodded, though his smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Emily," he said, his tone serious now. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." She met his gaze, her heart pounding. There was something in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll remember that." That evening, as she sat at the dinner table with Mark and the kids, her mind kept drifting back to Robert. She tried to focus on the conversation, but her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, longing, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Emily," Mark said, his voice sharp. "Are you even listening?" She blinked, pulled from her thoughts. "What?" He sighed, setting his fork down with a clatter. "I asked if you could pick up my dry cleaning tomorrow. But never mind, I'll do it myself." "No, I'll do it," she said quickly, though the words felt hollow. The rest of the meal passed in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. When the kids excused themselves to do homework, Emily stood to clear the table, her hands trembling. Mark watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You've been distracted lately," he said finally. "Is something going on?" She froze, her heart racing. "No," she said too quickly. "Just tired, I guess." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Just don't forget we have that charity event next weekend. I need you to be on your game." "I won't forget," she said, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. Later, as she lay in bed beside Mark, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about Robert's smile, the way he made her feel seen, valued. She thought about Mark, about the distance between them that seemed to grow wider every day. And then, before she could stop herself, she reached for her phone and typed out a message. "Thank you for today. I needed that. The reply came almost instantly. "Anytime, Emily. Sleep well. She put the phone down, her heart pounding. She knew she was playing with fire, but for the first time in years she felt alive. And that, she realized, was a feeling she wasn't ready to let go of. The charity event loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, its weight pressing down on Emily's shoulders. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the hem of her dress for what felt like the 100th time. The fabric clung to her in all the wrong places, and no matter how she styled her hair, it fell flat against her scalp. She sighed, stepping back to survey the damage. Mark appeared in the doorway, his tie perfectly knotted, his suit immaculate. "You ready?" he asked, his tone clipped. "Almost," she replied, forcing a smile. He glanced at his watch, a subtle but pointed gesture. "We need to leave in 5 minutes. Don't make us late." The drive to the venue was silent, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Emily stared out the window, her mind drifting to Robert. She hadn't seen him since their morning in the garden, but his words lingered in her thoughts, a constant reminder of the connection they had shared. The event was a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. Emily moved through the crowd like a ghost, her laughter hollow, her words rehearsed. Mark was in his element, charming donors and schmoozing with colleagues, his attention only occasionally flickering to her. It was during a lull in the conversation that she felt her phone buzz in her clutch. She excused herself, slipping into a quiet corner to check the message. Thinking of you. Hope tonight isn't too unbearable. Her heart skipped a beat as she read Robert's words. She glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, before typing a quick reply. It's torture. Wish I were there with you. The response came almost instantly. You know where to find me. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. The temptation was overwhelming. A siren's call she wasn't sure she could resist. Emily! She jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Mark stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Who are you texting? No one, she said quickly, slipping the phone back into her clutch. Just the babysitter. She wanted to check in. He studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Don't wander off. She nodded, her throat tight. As he walked away, she felt a wave of guilt crash over her. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the thought of returning to her empty, lonely life was unbearable. The ride home was just as silent as the drive there. Mark didn't speak, his attention focused on the road, his jaw clenched. Emily stared out the window, her mind racing. When they pulled into the driveway, Mark turned to her, his voice low and measured. We need to talk. Her heart sank. About what? About whatever's going on with you, he said, his tone sharp. You've been distant, distracted. And don't think I haven't noticed you sneaking off to text someone. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Is there someone else? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. Emily felt the weight of his gaze, the accusation in his words. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was imagining things, but the lie wouldn't come. Mark, just tell me the truth, he interrupted, his voice rising. I deserve that much. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. There's someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stared at her, his expression a mixture of hurt and anger. Who is it? She shook her head, unable to meet his gaze. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, he snapped. Who is it, Emily? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. Robert, she said finally. Our neighbor. Mark's face went pale, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Robert, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The old guy next door. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant for this to happen. He laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and devoid of humor. You never meant for it to happen, he echoed. Do you have any idea what this will do to us? To the kids? I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know, and I'm so sorry. He shook his head, his expression hardening. Sorry isn't going to fix this, Emily. They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between them. Finally, Mark opened the car door and stepped out, slamming it shut behind him. Emily watched as he walked into the house, her heart aching with regret. She knew she had made a mistake, but the thought of losing Robert, of losing the connection they had shared, was unbearable. As she sat there, her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out, her hands shaking as she read the message. "I'm here if you need me." She stared at the screen, her mind racing. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of facing the consequences filled her with dread. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and walked into the house, ready to face whatever came next.